Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
Any deal which makes Mr Netanyahu as mad as hell and not going to take it anymore sounds like a deal worth supporting.
And privately at least, the feudal dictatorship of Saudi Arabia is furious too. The worst reactionary backwoodsmen in the US Congress are up in arms and their media has immediately come to heel. Though Fox News, characteristically well-informed, told their audience that Obama had made a nuclear deal with Iraq.
Now, that would be news. But that doesn't mean the deal between the P5+1 and Iran is necessarily good in itself. Neither does it mean it will be without regional ramifications. Joining us now to discuss the historic Eid agreement is Mohammed Kamaali of CASMII, Campaign Against Sanctions and Military Intervention in Iran. Well, it looks like the sanctions are coming to an end and there's not likely now to be a military intervention. I suppose that puts your organisation out of business.
Well, I hope so. I wish I was that optimistic. I think there's still a long way off before the sanctions, at least, are actually removed. The military threats, I think, are largely irrelevant now, and they have been for quite some time. But the sanctions regime is still in place. It's still at least 6 months before they are actually lifted from the time that this agreement actually enters practice. So I think
tell the viewers what kind of sanctions we're talking about.
Well, the sanctions were extremely comprehensive. It's ranged from preventing Iran from selling its petroleum, its oil from its refineries, to insurance, to banking, to even some medical equipments. It was comprehensive. It was to the effect that telecommunications
it basically cut Iran off from the world. The TV stations taken off platforms.
There were a lot
of
TV stations and satellite channels which were under the pretext that they were actually connected to the Iranian government. They were cut off on that. So it was quite comprehensive to the effect that even ordinary Iranians, which had nothing to do, not just with the nuclear program, but also nothing to do with the Iranian government, nothing to do with any governmental organization whatsoever, they were also affected. The Iranian students, for example, could not transfer money from Iran to where they were studying, if they were studying abroad. You had an issue where a lot of patients in Iranian hospitals could not get the medication that they needed in time. And all of that sort of contributed to the suffering of ordinary Iranians. But at the same time, I think after a while, there came a sense that, in fact, Iran should continue to rely on its own internal resources in order to overcome those sanctions. I think that's a very important point that needs to be stressed because Iranians sort of felt that this is how it's going to be for quite a while. So let's
necessity being the mother of invention.
Yeah. And that has been the case for Iran's military for much longer than the more recent sanctions, for example, where a lot of efforts that Iranians had done on military advancements, largely defensive, of course, had been homegrown. And of course, the nuclear file that we discuss as part of this agreement, that's a prime example of where the international community kind of prevented Iran as a sovereign country to collaborate with other countries which had previously developed their nuclear programs to kind of obtain technological advancements to create a program inside. Because Iran was prevented from that, then they had to do this on their own. And that contributed to a large-scale nuclear program, which included from enrichment, from building reactors, and so on. A lot of countries, for example, do not even go down the enrichment routes because they have free access to open markets, international markets. They can just purchase enriched uranium or fuel for their reactors. Because Iran was, precisely because it was under sanction and it was prevented from buying enriched uranium for its civilian nuclear program, unjustly, of course, they resorted to building their own internal indigenous
It's the law of
program.
unintended consequences
Exactly,
at work. Let's look at the political context now. It's a major failure for Netanyahu that this deal has been reached. The British Foreign Secretary this week said something I've never heard a British Foreign Secretary ever say, namely that no agreement would have satisfied Israel, and stating boldly that Israel wanted to have a continuation of a state of tension, but that that was not in the interests of the region and not in British interests. A very decisive break, actually, between Britain and Israel. So he's mad as hell. He has a lot of friends in the US Congress. How do you evaluate their capabilities of scuppering this deal?
I think the Israelis will try their best, but they kind of, maybe they're blind to this, maybe they simply ignore it, the fact that they have become quite irrelevant in this topic. I mean, the first thing that came out of the Israelis was that, you know, they are not part of this deal. In itself, there's a sort of arrogance associated with that. But if you look at it in practice, that means that they are kind of isolating themselves.
Inside Iran, one reads that the Revolutionary Guard and if you like, the most zealous revolutionaries in Iran are not happy. What's their capability of scuppering the deal?
I think we have to differentiate between their rhetoric and what they do in practice. Rhetoric is something you can define your audience and then, you know, target your rhetoric based on that. But in practice, they are absolutely behind it, and they have many times before the deal was actually reached expressed their support. Of course, they sort of expressed their red lines and that sort of thing, similar to Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei as well. But they have been largely supporting not just of the deal, because the final text only came out a few days ago, but also of the negotiating team as well, and that's extremely important. So they put their trust in the negotiating team, and they publicly expressed that trust. Rouhani's administration also benefited, in a sense, from this deal, in a sense that it kind of unified Iran's various factions from right to left in supporting the deal as a national project, not just a certain outcome that was a result of Rouhani's election as well. So, and it's also important to realize that the negotiations and the deal did not start in Vienna 3 weeks ago. It did not even start with Rouhani's presidency. It kind of gave it a new momentum, of course. But the whole reason why the agreement was reached, I think, is because we have a new situation in the Middle East as a whole and in the world, in a sense, where, as you mentioned, the case of Israel, there's a lot of reasonableness sort of prevailing, in the sense that, there's a divergence from Israeli interest and Western interest, where a lot of countries, including the United States, have finally realized that, in fact, it is not in their interest to blindly support Israeli policies in the Middle East, blindly support even Saudi policies in the Middle East. And this is one step towards that goal, that where the United States and other European countries, as well as China and Russia, of course, they are kind of distancing themselves from Israel, and the long-term ramifications are much more huge than the details of this deal. I think overall the deal, we could argue about the details of it, whether it is in actual, in Iran's actual interest or not. But in the long term, I think it's without a doubt a testament to Iran's negotiating capabilities and the new situation that we're facing in the Middle East, where Iran has been recognized as a major regional player, where it cannot be avoided any longer. And the US policy of supporting Israelis and Saudis over the many decades has kind of resulted in the situation that we see from ISIS, from the situation that we see and the chaos that we see in Syria and Iraq. So they are kind of distancing themselves from this and sort of moving into a new chapter. We are only at the beginning of this new chapter, so we can only remain hopeful. But I think it's the right direction, if you like. Yeah.
I was wondering, indeed, how this deal is going to translate for the daily lives of the Iranians, as well as Iran's position in the region.
I think Iran's position in the region has already improved quite a lot, not just because of the deal, the deal was a sort of a final stamp on this. But before that, because Iran's position had improved a lot, that's how the deal was reached in a sense. Otherwise, there would be no way the world powers would actually sit with Iran. And you had Security Council resolutions where it was saying that you either dismantle your enrichment program or these sanctions will continue. Iran not only kept. Negotiated lifting of sanctions, but also kept its enrichment program, which is a very, very significant.
Will it allow more trade, international trade?
Absolutely. I think even before the deal was reached, a lot of investment firms, a lot of multinationals kind of lined up, and there have been trips to Iran more recently. Not actual trade, but trips, sort of fact-finding for how they're going to get back into this market. It's a huge market, 80 million population. It's a very diverse economy, unlike a lot of other countries in the Middle East. Not only oil, but also it's a massive country, as you know. Because of that diverse economy, I think there's a lot of potential for a lot of companies, not just multinational, but also small businesses to kind of cooperate in the Iranian market as well. There's a sense that this will sort of provide Iranian expats an opportunity to return to Iran as well, so whether they are businessmen or they are academics and that sort of thing. So that's kind of overall positive.
In a word, Mohammed, because we're running out of time, which of Iran's allies in the region may now be ditched? Bashar al-Assad, Hezbollah, Hamas, the revolutionaries in Yemen, under the line, will any of those now be ditched?
I don't think so. No, I don't think so. If anything, this deal is more reason that Iran's positions, not just with regards to its nuclear program, but in the Middle East, have been vindicated. It's a testament that, in fact, those positions were correct. In fact, those who Iran supported were actually, had legitimate concerns. Whether it is in Syria, it's a realization that the United States has had recently, whereas Iran has been saying this for a long time, that the alternative to Assad is ISIS. Exactly. It doesn't mean that Assad is perfect, but it means that the alternative to it is ISIS. You want to topple him and his regime, what will you be left with? I think that's the practical question that Iran has had from the beginning. It's not the Free Syrian Army or those sort of moderate rebels, whatever that means.
Moderate heart-eaters.
Exactly.
Mohammed, we've run out of time, but a fascinating tour of the horizon. Thanks very much for coming on the Sputnik.
Coming up after this break, it's a tale of two traitors and their very different punishment. Chelsea Manning and David Petraeus. Don't miss it.
Welcome back to Sputnik. Chelsea Manning and her Wikileaks comrades, we attended Julian Assange's 44th birthday party last night in the Ecuador embassy under siege, will be judged by history as the most heroic of whistleblowers.
David Petraeus' whistle was blown rather by his secret lover and for a commercial book deal.
He was the former chief of the US Armed Forces, whilst Manning was a humble foot soldier. Petraeus was an immoral, cheating liar. Manning, an honest teller of uncomfortable truths. Manning will probably never see daylight again. Petraeus has never spent a day behind bars. Joining us now is Oliver Shykles of Queer Friends of Chelsea Manning. Oliver, welcome to the Sputnik.
Thanks for having me.
Tell the viewers, if you will, just exactly what Chelsea Manning is in prison for.
Well, Chelsea Manning, she was a private intelligence analyst in the US Army, and she joined the Army at a very young age. She was 21, 22 at the time. She, in 2009, was stationed in near Baghdad at Forward Operating Base Hammer as an intelligence analyst she had access to two intelligence networks while she was there. And really, during her time doing the analysis of that information and giving it to troops on the ground, she very quickly realised that the war was not as it seemed to people back in the States and to the rest of the coalition countries. And she was seeing innocent people being arrested, being tortured, being killed, completely unnecessarily. And when you're behaving like that in a country, when your military is behaving like that in a country, you are not going to win hearts and minds. So she decided, well, she first spoke to her superiors and they told her to get lost. They weren't interested. So finally she felt she had no option really but to go to the New York Times and the Washington Post and approach them with the information that she'd got from these intelligence networks. They did not respond to her, unfortunately for them, because these were the biggest scoops since we had Daniel Ellsberg and with the Pentagon Papers. So they lost a big one there, and unsurprisingly, after that, they denied that Chelsea had tried to contact them. Unfortunately, she was chatting online to a gentleman called Adrian Lamo, who's an infamous hacker known for hacking Microsoft, Yahoo and the New York Times, and I think that's why Chelsea reached out to him, because she felt she was doing something that she could only talk to a very few people about, and she trusted him to have the hacking skills that he knew how they could communicate together using encrypted technology so that Chelsea Manning wouldn't be exposing herself. Unfortunately, Adrian Lamo turned out to be a bit of a snitch and turned on Chelsea. He has a reputation for being a bit of likes the attention of the media, shall we say. So it's very likely...
He betrayed her to the authorities.
Yes, for a bit of limelight for himself. Because...
But the revelations that she made and her collaboration with Wikileaks will go down in history. I mean,
absolutely,
one
yes.
in particular, the helicopter footage where the controller says, "Light them up," and the helicopter's machine guns proceed to light up a large number of civilians and children who are lit up, all right. They are incinerated to death for absolutely no reason.
Yeah.
Just a kind of shooting range.
Yeah, I mean...
It looked like a video game.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
the scary part
and
of it.
I mean, I've played those kind of video games with friends together in a house, and exactly the same kind of language is being used. Yeah, let's get them, you know. But for them, that's real life, you know. But they're treating
real
it
life,
as a video game, really.
Real death.
And you know, that collateral murder video was really one of the deciding moments for Chelsea when she saw that, because 12 people were killed in that action. 2 children were seriously hurt. A young girl was shot in the stomach, and it was because really this Apache helicopter that saw them was a mile away. They couldn't really see anything. They mistook a camera bag of one of the Reuters journalists for a gun. They didn't even bother to try and get close and get proper confirmation. Incidentally, one of the first army soldiers on the ground to arrive at the scene came across this just absolute carnage, a chap called Ethan McCord. Saw what happened, saw this girl with her, you know, half her stomach blown away, and this has destroyed his life. He shortly afterwards tried to commit suicide while he was in the military. He was discharged, given no help whatsoever, went home with fantasies of killing his own family, became a serious alcoholic, and again tried to kill himself.
Words fail me, but they haven't failed Chelsea. She's writing now.
Absolutely, yes.
For The Guardian?
Yep, she's got an op-ed in The Guardian. She publishes every few weeks. I really recommend people read her stuff. It's fascinating, gives you an insight into what she's going through as a trans woman in a male, you know, military prison.
Why have they got her still in a male military prison?
To be honest, that's not one of the things I've known that she's requested to be moved into a female prison. I know that she wanted the hormone replacement therapy to begin, and this is a first for the US military. This is something they have denied all trans people who have been held by the military. They've refused them treatment.
Because she's in a military prison as well, right?
Yeah, because if she was in a kind of state prison, she would get this treatment.
Is she in solitary in the prison?
No, when she was first being held, this is pre-trial conditions before the trial came to take place. This is during 2011. She was held for about 11 months at Quantico Marine Base, and the conditions she was kept in were absolutely awful. I mean, she was put on suicide watch and was woken up every 5 minutes. This is 24 hours a day. Every 5 minutes, someone would open the hatch and say, "Are you okay?" And Chelsea would have to respond, "Yes, I'm okay." And that would happen 24 hours a day, every 5 minutes. There was also lights were left on all night, 24 hours. She had to get up at 5 a.m., go to bed at 10 p.m. Sorry, and during the day she was not allowed to lie down. She could only really stand or sit. She was stripped naked.
Can people
regularly.
write to her? Does she receive mail?
Yep, she's at Fort Leavenworth now in Kansas, and it's possible to write to her. If you go to the Bradley Manning Support Network website, they keep the address, because the address has sometimes changed, so it's worth keeping.
I think that's a good idea. Everyone should do that. Let's all send solidarity messages to Chelsea Manning at Fort Leavenworth prison. She is serving 35 years.
Yeah.
Whilst David Petraeus, who was the head of the whole shooting match...
He's a four-star general and was the director of the CIA.
He got 2 years probation. I mean, if either of them are traitors, he's a much bigger traitor, and his betrayal was for commercial or sexual purposes.
Yeah.
He got 2 years probation. That must be very hard for you to take.
Yes, and as well because before Chelsea Manning was convicted, there's quite a famous recording of President Obama at a fundraiser saying that Chelsea Manning was guilty, and you know this is completely illegal for him because he's
to prejudge the case.
Is kind of, and that's exerting pressure. Maybe you know the judge has seen this and thinks, oh well, you know he's the president of the United States. If I want my career to go anywhere, maybe I should make sure that his judgment becomes the judgment. And Petraeus, Obama again said, you know, oh, you know, there's not enough evidence to prove that Petraeus, as he's well known now,
Petraeus, yes.
Damaged national security in any way. Incidentally, Robert Gates, former Defence Secretary, said that Chelsea Manning had not damaged national security, would not change US foreign policy, and if anything, had just embarrassed the US. That's as bad as it got. Well, really.
That's the truth of it. But embarrassment on a global and gigantic scale.
Yeah.
And if they're not embarrassed, isn't the half of it. Shame ought to be the natural response of any decent person in the United States. This was being done in their name, using their tax dollars, and in pursuit of their foreign policy goals. Now, tell us about queer friends of Chelsea Manning. It's an unusual name, one I'm glad to be associated with, but tell us about it.
Well, we set up in late 2010, really, and the aim really was because at the time Chelsea was, you know, formerly known as Bradley Manning, a gay man. So we set this up to kind of really raise the profile of Chelsea in the queer community. So we were attending.
And has that worked? Is there a deal of sympathy?
We've noticed as the years have progressed that there is much more sort of awareness. The first couple of years we were doing, you know, London Pride, Manchester Pride, and going to various events. That a lot of people were asking, well, who is this person? We don't know. But now, you know, we went on London Pride. we're now getting huge cheers. Very few people are asking who Chelsea Manning is. So it's really working, and the word is getting out there. And thanks to you and RT Sputnik that we'll get the word out even more.
It's our honour. It's our honour to host you and the campaign, and we'll make sure the contact details are on the screen. Oliver,
Fantastic.
thanks very much. And now it's your turn to tell us what you think through the portals of social media. What's rattling, Gayatri?
So Iran, deal or no deal? Ajmal Abdul Jabbar answers, it's a mixed bag. I believe it's more about US interest, $, in Iran's national resources. All in all, however, a good deal. And Twit Bahrain says, we believe that a deal will be a win-win, and no deal will just delay and waste efforts of all. Okay, and when it comes to Chelsea Manning versus Petraeus, or Petraeus, Clara Contra says, Chelsea's 35 years are a badge of honor for her and a disgrace to US, as is Petraeus' 2 years probation. And Hakes answers, Manning jailed for exposing mass murdering heroes in US Army khaki. All right, that's all that we've got for this week.
Which, alas, means that's the end of the show.
You can stay in touch with us on Twitter at @RT_Sputnik or on Facebook, Sputnik on Russia Today. Goodbye from me, Gayatri.
And from me, George Galloway. It's been marvellous.